Okay, this is part 3 on the double window to French door conversion, and I basically have the rough opening framed and not completely secured, but I have all of the pieces in place. Now, let me just go over some of the details of how I did that. The final objective is to achieve a 48 by 80 rough opening where the diagonal measurements agree within 1/8 of an inch. So my approach was starting off with a square cut across the bottom plate, and that's defining one corner. I then used a plumb line to give me a vertical line to give that spot on the header. I then cut a piece 48 inches plus the width of these jack studs, which turns out to be 51 inches because these pieces are very close to 1.5 inches exactly. So you do want to actually measure your stock when you take that into account. Okay, then that gives me 48 inches of this opening across the top. Now, and the bottom piece is also done at 48 inches, this sill cut. So the last piece here pretty much is going to come in plumb. You don't really need to plumb this. You can check it, of course, but if it's 48 inches at the top and the bottom, and if it's 90, if this is plumb, that will be plumb. But the weakness in that argument is if the subfloor is not flat, there could be could be an issue. So you do want to check also with your level, if you do have it, although the level alone by itself won't necessarily give you the same accuracy that you can achieve with the plumb lines. Using both of them, of course, is best. Okay. Now, after I determined the location up on the header of where the plumb stud would fall, I then, it turned out I needed 2 inches of a header to reduce this opening down to 80. And what I used was a 2x4, and I used 1/2 inch sheathing. I just used some 1/2 inch sheathing that I actually had to cut off in order to create this opening, and I just used it as a spacer in there. Okay, and I secured that 1/2 inch to that header at both of these corners where I knew it had to go, and then I secured this king stud. In this case, I put the screws in diagonally since I didn't have any room to work in here, flush up against that square piece. And then I worked the same from this direction. I secured this king stud directly up against that piece, which had been squared off and was at exactly 51 inches across. Okay, now working down from the bottom, on the bottom side, I secured now the jack stud into the bottom plate. Okay, and then I secured the jack stud against the king stud. So I just worked my way around on this to produce as square a result as I could. Okay, and I will note a few things. I have been using screws just because, in case I don't want to have something where I need to take something apart and I can't. Now I did notice when I first put this screw in here, for whatever reason, it didn't cinch these pieces tight. There was a gap. Yet the torque on the screw gun was all the way. So I simply took the screw out and I put some wax on it and I tapped this block back into position, and then I screwed it again, and then it came in flush. So, you know, flush, you can't see any light in there, okay? So with the nail, you can't really do that, of course. You can't get them out. If you have a problem, you end up banging everything. I didn't want to bang everything around here because I want to set things into position. And a lot of times you bang them, you end up banging other stuff around out of position. Okay, now these pieces I bought new, and that's to get them as square and straight without any bowing or warping. That piece that which I did replace, I had stock I could have used, but I bought 5 new pieces of 2 by 4 by 8 for about $5.50. And they were just straighter, that's all, because they're been freshly milled. But they're not perfect, okay? When I go to secure these, for example, on this piece I secured this one here, one of these pieces did have, I'm looking to cinch them up nice and tight, and if one of them is slightly warped, then I can put in that screw a little bit off center to bring it together. Also, I can use this clamp to clamp them together even before I put the screw in to take the warp out, okay? I don't want to have to try to take the warp out with the screw itself. That's not going to give you the best results. You want, if one of them is slightly warped, you want to take that warp out with the clamp. Then you can secure it, okay? Here, for example, I haven't secured. I will now tie these 2 beams together by screwing them in, and that will make this more rigid. Right now, what I've done is the 4 corners, okay? And I do measure 48 inches across. I will say that, so for example, when I was cutting these pieces, I want these to fit in exactly snug. You can make a measurement with something like a tape measure. One problem I did have with my tape measure is, and I've noticed this over the years, that little piece there, okay, it's supposed to be at 90 degrees, but it isn't always. The reason is, if you use your tape measure a lot, you'll notice that occasionally it will fall. And when it hits the floor like that, that thing gets knocked out, okay? I've already straightened that out a bit, okay? You want to straighten that out, and then you want to test it on a piece of wood where you know the dimension. So, for example, this happens to be a 1.5 inch. You can measure the 1.5 inch without using that particular feature. Then you can use it with that feature where it's locking it on, and then you can verify you get the same result. That's all. If that piece is not, if that's bent, it will affect the result. And in this case, the first one I cut here was off by 1/16 of an inch. I measured it, I cut it, and then I found that when I slid it in place, there was no tension on it, okay? So what I did was I moved it over and I tested it out on this side. It was fine on this side just because the 2 sides are not exactly the same because of the subfloor. It's not exactly flat across. So I didn't have to cut another piece for that. I was able to use that piece even though the original cut was a little bit short. You want to make the original cut a little bit on the proud side or a little bit too long because you can always trim it if it isn't. If you cut it a little bit short on something like this where you're building this inside, this frame inside, when it's a little bit short, you're really kind of stuck. You'd have to add a shim in there, okay? Which you don't really want to do if you don't have to. Okay, I did add an extra piece of 3/4 inch subflooring stock that I had lying around just to fill in this gap. So to make this a rough opening as square as I can. I'm going to measure it diagonally to see if I fall within the 1/8 of an inch on the two diagonals, but honestly, if it isn't, I'm not really have any plan to do anything about it because I have gotten this about as square as I think I can get it. But if I did have a problem, I could make adjustments, but it's not an easy measurement to make on the two diagonals with one person because you have to hold the string, and you have to be careful on comparing the two diagonal measurements. The string can stretch. It's a difficult measurement to make exactly to within 1/8 of an inch, I would say. So I'll do that later. Okay, thanks.